So good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar, which is looking at the importance and influence of the dairy beef index, which has been created in the last number of years in order to deal with the issue around calf quality, moving from the dairy herd into the beef herd, which has declined in the last number of years. So I suppose there's always a trade-off, or can often be a trade-off, and can be consequences of actions. So the consequences of the improvement in the EBI and the dairy stock that we have on farms now is that there has been a slight reduction, or has been a reduction in the quality of the beef animal coming from that. So the Frisian bull calf has obviously become a low value animal, and we want to try to circumvent that issue as much as possible. So Tuesday's seminar in relation to the sexed semen was one of the aspects of it that we will be focusing on from now on. Stephen outlined his research, and that's research that is continuing in order to try and improve the results from sexed semen. Big influx of it into the community, I suppose, or in terms of availability this season, and that should facilitate us to use more beef straws if possible within the herd and improve the calf quality, and also this will lend to improving the quality of the dairy stock as well, because we won't be breeding replacements off of poor quality cows potentially. So the dairy beef index was created to do this, and we have two speakers who are very much involved in the development of this in the last number of years, in Siobhan Ring, who's a geneticist with ICBF, and Noirin McHugh, who's working as a research officer predominantly in the sheep and beef side with Teagasc Moorepark since 2011 when she completed her PhD. So Siobhan is going to give us a presentation in relation to increasing the value of your 2021 calf crop using the dairy beef index. And then Noirin is actually going to talk you through a slide of the active bull list, which we will put up. So the top 10 bulls that are on the active bull list, just to explain the detail behind it. The two girls know the index inside out because they were involved in the development of it. So they're going to give you their insight into it, and then we'll throw it open to questions following Siobhan's presentation briefly. And then once Noirin has gone through the list, we'll open it up to questions to both speakers. So I'll just hand over to you now, Siobhan. So hopefully all will go okay.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. So good morning, everyone. So I suppose the first thing to focus in on is maximising the value of your dairy replacements. So to do that, you'll want to mate your best stock to a team of high EBI dairy bulls. So Dunberry gave us some good guidelines around that yesterday. Now, if you can at all, you'll want to mate your maiden heifers to dairy, not beef. So it's really worth the effort. And I suppose the reason I say that is because that's where you'll see the fastest improvement. Because on average, heifers have an EBI that's €44 ahead of cows, meaning genetically they're milkier, they're more fertile, and they're healthier. So you don't need to wait until they calve down to cash in on that. Get them in calf to dairy, and you'll have better replacements next year for doing so. And then I suppose the second way of increasing the value of your calves, and it's what I'm going to talk about today, is to make your inferior stock to beef. So cows are now more fertile, as Stuart said, they're surviving longer, so the need for lots of dairy replacements has reduced and will probably continue to do so. Now that means that there's an increased opportunity for mating beef bulls to dairy cows. So once you have enough cows bred to dairy to get your replacements, or that you're happy you're going to buy in some replacements, you should be considering beef bulls. Now, traditionally, I suppose it's been cows that haven't kept AI within either 6 or 8 weeks at the start of the breeding season that were put to beef. But I suppose there's an opportunity to be a bit more selective in this. So I suppose you all know cows in your own herd, problem cows that are high cell count, have mastitis, lameness, late calvers, or low EBI cows that you wouldn't keep a replacement from yourself. So these cows are potentially beef bull candidates. So irrespective of whether they come in the first day that you start the AI or the 8th week that you're AIing, I suppose it's to think about, should they really be going to beef bulls? So I suppose I had one farmer on to me there the other day, and he actually sells replacement heifer calves, but he didn't want to be selling bad stock. So he decided he'd put his bottom 10 cows ranked in ABI to beef bulls. So just to give you an example of where you might find that, this here is a screenshot of the EBI report. It's a very simple way of identifying those cows. So on the left, you were given the top cows on EBI, and on the left you have your top cows, and on the right you have your bottom cows ranked in EBI. So you can access that from ICBF. You can give the ICBF team a call if you're not actually familiar of even just how to do that. But today, I suppose what I'm really going to focus in on is the beef bull that's being used. So whether it be AI or a stock bull, trying to get more value from those calves. So if we take a look at the dairy beef cycle, it's very much like a gearbox of a tractor where you've got maybe 3 main cogs that must each work in unison to allow that tractor to run or that system to continue. So our first cog here, it's our dairy farmer. Now they're predominantly focused on the cow, getting the cow calved and back into the milking parlour, then getting her bred again. For the calf, the priority is generally to get the calf moved off the farm as quickly as possible, and of course to get a bit of value back. But not a whole pile of focus is generally on the breeding of that calf in a lot of cases. Our second cog then is our beef farmer. Now they're focused on the calf. They want to buy a cheap, healthy calf of good conformation so that they can generate a return on investment because margins are so tight. If they want to continue in a dairy beef system, they must take the calf that the dairy farmer produces, even though the dairy farmer's goal when generating that calf was very different. So you've got your contrast between your easy calving versus good carcass merit. And then our final cog in the wheel is the beef bull breeder. So they're focused on supplying the calf that the market demands. They supply the dairy farmer who typically only ask, what's his calving difficulty and what's his gestation? So they're the key traits that the breeder focuses on when trying to produce the next generation of bulls, and often there's very little focus on the carcass merit side of the house. So that system works well so long as all 3 stakeholders are making an income from the system. The problem is though, when you focus solely on calving difficulty and gestation to get a dairy beef calf, carcass merit tends to suffer. So that means over time, the beef breeder is going to be more and more out of pocket, and that really just, it throws a spanner in the works and seizes the entire system. So what we're doing with the dairy beef index is trying to reignite the system through identifying beef bulls that will produce quality beef calves from the dairy herd. But by giving the dairy farmer what he wants in terms of easy calving and short gestation, but very importantly here is trying to improve the carcass merit of those calves so that the system can continue to run. So the dairy beef index then in itself, it's very like the EBI, so the economic breeding index, in that you'll use it for breeding and for picking bulls, but the dairy beef index is for picking beef bulls. So there's a large range of traits in it. There's pretty much a 50-50 split between traits that are important to the beef farmer and to the dairy farmer. So if you look at our little wheel here, it's selecting for easy calving, short gestation, less calf mortality, heavier, more conformed carcasses that meet the factory spec, that are docile and consume less feed. So I suppose the index allows you to improve the traits that the dairy farmer is concerned with and the beef farmer, both at the same time. So ensuring that the dairy farmer is a continued outlet for his calf and the beef farmer can actually make a return then on the investment. So I suppose the next question is, well, what is a good dairy beef index? What is good value? What is a bad value? So a good dairy beef index bull is one that has the highest euro value. So a bull with a higher DBI euro value should pass on more desirable characteristics to its progeny. So here what we've got is we've got 4 whited bullocks. The one on the left says my dad has a dairy beef index of 100 euro, while the one on the right says my dad has a dairy beef index of 20 euro. Straight away, that tells me the sire of the bullock on the left should produce better cattle. In fact, his calves should on average be 80 euro more profitable than the bull that produced calves like the bullock on the right. So I suppose if I use the sire of the bullock on the left for 4 years and he produced 10 calves per year, that's an additional expected revenue of 3,200 euro benefit of using the sire of the bull on the left versus the sire of the bull on the right. So, and just to say here, I suppose it's important to mention that additional revenue is coming in at all stages of the animal's life. So I suppose that through easy calving, short gestation, less feed intake, and then a higher quality carcass at the end of the day. But it's not all being achieved, I suppose, either when the animal is sold in the mart or in the factory. In terms of actually accessing the dairy beef index, so this is really a very new index. It was only launched last year, and last year was only available for AI bulls. Now it's there for stock bulls as well. So for a lot of people, this will be the first time that I suppose they'll really know that it actually exists, that there's a tool there to help them, and actually finding their way around of where they might find this information. So I suppose there's 3 places on pretty much on ICBF. So if you go to www.icbf.com, first area is the animal search. The second is the active bull list. Now, these are both available on the home screen of ICBF.com. And also you've got the sales catalogue. So the sales catalogue, you'll find that either obviously in the sales ring at the mart, or many breeders might provide it to you if they were calling to the yard to buy. In terms of the animal search, you can use that to search either stock bulls or AI bulls. And for the active bull list, it's very similar to the dairy active bull list in that it ranks AI bulls, ranks the top AI bulls based on their dairy beef index. So I'm just going to go through how you might work the animal search today to give you an idea as to how to use it and the traits that are in it. So I suppose if you were thinking of buying a bull in the morning, the first thing I would do before sitting into the Jeep is ring the breeder and ask him for the tag numbers of the bulls he's selling. I'd then get my phone or computer and simply type those tag numbers into the animal search on ICBF.com and press this search button here. So the first thing that's going to pop up to me is it's going to ask me which index should I choose. If you're a dairy farmer, it's always the dairy beef index. So that's our option here on the right. The next thing that will pop up is lots of numbers and lots of graphs. The section on the left tells me that this bull here has a dairy beef index of 104 euro. And based on the bar graph here, I can see that means he ranks within the top 10% of bulls across all breeds on dairy beef index. The next thing I can see is the contribution of his index coming from calving related traits and from beef related traits. So this bull is getting most of his index from the value of beef subindex. Again, he ranks well compared to other bulls of many other breeds because his bar is further up to the right here. If I wanted to compare him only against the Limousin breed, I would press this little button here, so within Limousin breed, and then again that will show me how he ranks relative to other Limousin breeds. If I wanted a more detailed look at the traits that make up his dairy beef index, I can scroll down the page, and this section is split into the value of calving subindex and the value of beef subindex. So I suppose the key traits you'd be most concerned with here are calving difficulty, gestation, and carcass weight. Now, if you weren't too interested in the figures, you can just look at the bar charts to give you kind of a quick feel for what this bull is good for and what this bull is not so good for. So just to remember, the further the bar extends to the right, the better that bull is for that trait relative to all other breeds. So quite quickly, what I can see is that this bull is quite good on lots of traits as the bars go very much to the right. What sticks out here to me most is that gestation length here is very much to the left, telling me that he's actually ranks within the bottom 10% for gestation length, even though he's very good in other traits. His value is plus 3.4 days, so that tells me he's going to carry a couple of days relative to other bulls. And one thing I suppose just to highlight here is this risk of dairy heifer calving difficulty. He's flagged as high, which means he would cause a lot of difficulty on heifers, so he's really not recommended for them. If you were going to use a beef bull on heifers, you're looking for a bull that is flagged as low risk. Now, the other figure here, dairy cow calving difficulty. If we were using him on cows, you can see that his figure is 4.4. That means that just over 4 in every 100 of his calvings are expected to result in a difficult calving. Now, if that's a level that's acceptable to you, then go ahead with it. But just be aware what that figure means when you're going into a yard trying to buy a bull. Are you happy with that level of difficulty? Maybe you're happy with a bit more. Maybe you want to bring it back a bit. And I suppose the next thing just to highlight, again, I suppose the presentation of calving difficulty has been improved this year. A lot of people will have seen it, but I suppose a lot more won't. So previously, every bull would have had a single calving difficulty figure, and that was assumed applicable across all animals, cows and heifers, and whether it was a beef or a dairy animal. And I suppose the problem was, if you had a bull that was heavily used on cows or heavily used in the beef herd, his figure would have been over-dominated by those records. So meaning you could have had a bull that was, we'll say 2.1% here in this example, which would have been considered safe for heifers even on the old system. But a lot of his records could have been coming from the beef herd. So now that we've actually split up that into dairy animals and beef animals and heifers and for cows, we can actually see the true calving difficulty that we're expected to see in that bull's progeny. And I suppose you can actually get a better reflection of, okay, well, is he suitable or is he not for my herd? So I suppose with this change to the evaluation, there's a change in the scale, meaning the old figures you were familiar with have changed somewhat. So for heifers, bulls will not appear much more difficult for them, but for cows, for heifers, they will appear more difficult, but for cows, it'll be pretty much the same. So we've created a ready reckoner wheel to, I suppose, help farmers get to grips with the new scale. So if you haven't already received your one, contact the Herd Plus office on the number on the screen there for your one to get it to you today. And I suppose just finally, just to wrap up, the key messages from me, I suppose, are to make your best stock to high EBI dairy bulls and invest the time in heifers. Then I suppose make your inferior stock to beef, and you can select some of your problem cows for these once you have enough dairy replacements bred. Use high dairy beef index bulls because they leave a better revenue. And if you're buying a beef bull, do some homework first. Don't just arrive into the yard and assume that you're going to get everything that you're looking for. Do a bit of work first. It's a free service, the animal search, provided by ICBF. There's no cost to it. Make use of it. Then I suppose just when you are picking bulls on the dairy beef index, some key things to look out for. Choose the highest dairy beef index bull to maximize overall profitability. Then look at the calving difficulty figure. Make sure it's right for your herd and the animals that you're mating. If the bull is going to be used on cows, make sure you're looking at the cow calving difficulty. If he's going to be used on heifers, look at the heifer calving difficulty and the risk trait. Really, he should be low risk for heifers. Then look at the gestation. Positive values will carry more days, but maybe that might be a bit more acceptable if you were mating a cow very early in the breeding season. And then finally, just to look at carcass weight, try to use bulls that have a higher PTA value. So that's it from me, Stuart.
Okay, thanks, Siobhan. So just I probably forgot to say it at the outset, just for people maybe that might be new to the webinar thing, there's a Q&A option down at the bottom to actually ask a question, and I also put a poll up there just to get some feedback maybe from people as well. So if you want to answer the couple of questions that are there, that'd be great. So Siobhan, I suppose I'll kick off with just to clarify in terms of the calving difficulty figure. What does it actually represent in terms of a 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the calving difficulty spectrum, we'll say?
Yeah, excellent question, Stuart. So that's really the key thing to look for. And I suppose, okay, so if you have a figure of 1%, that means 1 in 100 calvings to that bull are expected to result in a difficult calving. 2 means 2 in 100, 3 means 3 in 100. And it's very important to just remember, what level of difficulty are you happy with? Often what we see is that, I suppose, the smaller herds, they're willing to take a little bit more difficulty to get that more quality calf, whereas the bigger herds, they want that calving difficulty figure to be as low as possible. But it's just look at that figure and see what are you actually happy with. It's very much, I suppose, like what Donna was talking about yesterday in terms of when you're looking at your milk yield, do I need more milk or don't I? It's what level are you happy with? There's not one goal figure for all herds.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing is with the switch potentially from, we'll say, if we reduce down the number of replacements that are being generated, like lots of people have been generating a lot of replacements in the last number of years, and there's a small bit of focus, as you said, because replacement rate is kind of is reducing, or our cows are lasting longer in herds and so forth, there isn't as much need for replacements, that there's actually scope for the use of the dairy beef index a lot earlier in the season. So people should actually be looking at using it in advance of when they'd actually be introducing the bull as well, shouldn't they?
That's right, yeah. So I suppose some people some people that even have stock bulls, they might consider maybe using beef AI bulls earlier in the season for those cows that they're going to selectively mate. So those cows that will come in early, but they want to put to beef, it's easier just to AI them because the AI man's coming rather than actually getting the stock bull out to do that job for you.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and I think there's a huge role. I think one of the questions that I asked in the poll is do people have adequate bull power, basically, or have they sufficient number of bulls to cover the number of cows that are going to be available to be covered following their dairy AI? And there's two aspects to it, I suppose: the health and safety risk with the bulls, and then there's also with the sheer number of bulls potentially that could be needed. And there's also this lag that we see on a regular on an annual basis from when we switch from our dairy AI to the stock bull coming into play, because generally stock bulls, if I correct me if I'm wrong, Siobhan, tend to carry time in the vast majority of cases, where with our AI bulls we can actually get shorter gestation. So we can see the likes of KYA, okay, he's not a particularly great bull on a Carcass traits, but he is bringing a shorter gestation of the equivalent to 5 days and maybe more. And there are some good stock bulls or good AI bulls out there that are 2 and 3 days shorter with very good Carcass traits. So would you care to comment on the idea of continuing to AI even with beef for a good period of time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose just to pick up on what you said there about the gestation, and so you'll see a lot of the time, yeah, a lot of beef bulls will be positive on gestation, but I suppose a lot of focus has been put, I suppose, in some breeds in particular, in terms of actually shortening that. And there's a huge amount of variation within each of the individual breeds in terms of what you can get. Like you gave KYA as an example there, but there would be other bulls of multiple other breeds, I suppose, that you can find short gestation in there as well. And I suppose over time that will continue to improve as we move on. And I suppose definitely, yeah, I suppose if you are putting out a beef bull, I suppose bull power is obviously a huge thing in bull fertility. To keep up that bit of AI, for a while, until you've got enough cows in calf that he can actually cope.
Very good. Now, just going to try something here that I haven't tried before. So Donald McGrath is after raising his hand here, so I'm going to let you talk here, Donald, so to ask your question. So unmute you there. Go ahead, so Donald, you should be unmuted there now. Yeah, it's sorry. Will you just type in the question, Donald? Maybe I can't seem to unmute you or unmute yourself. No, okay. Right, so thanks for that, Siobhan. So we'll come back to you if we get a few more questions in. There's a question after coming in. When mopping up with Frisian bulls that are genotyped and are showing a shorter gestation for most, how is there a quiet period in calving? Right. Did you hear that question, Siobhan?
I hear you. What do you mean?
So obviously this person is mopping up with Frisian bulls that have been genotyped and are supposed to have a shorter gestation, and there's still a quiet period in the calving season, they're saying. So, but I suppose, is it possibly dependent on when it comes, David? Maybe in that maybe when they finish, or are you mopping up completely with the Frisian bull? You're still getting the leg. So. I suppose the difference there is probably your genotyped Frisian is, even though there can be young bulls, they're probably still a couple of generations behind in terms of the AI bulls, possibly. Would that be fair to say, Siobhan? And that there just might be an extra couple of days again?
Well, I suppose that would be kind of a fair enough point. I suppose the AI bulls tend to be that much better, all right. Yeah.
Okay, so and then there's another question in then, is the dairy beef index available for all males, or do they have to be pedigree?
It's available for all males. Just type in their tag number into the animal search on ICBF, and you will find that. But I suppose just back, yeah.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, you were going to say something.
But on that, I suppose that point of David's, I suppose, is there a lag in the calving? Maybe might it be something back to your point of bull power, Stuart, maybe that maybe there isn't enough bulls in there maybe at that time, I suppose, after the cows are REI, that there's not enough of them in calf and the bull is having problems at that time?
Yeah, that's good. It is definitely a potential option. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think we'll move on so to Noirin. So if that's okay, thanks, Siobhan. Okay, so Noirin, I'm just going to share the slide here for you, so and we'll hand over to you. Okay.
Perfect. So just following on from what Siobhan has done, what I'm going to do is basically give a quick summary of the active bull list. So as Siobhan mentioned, it's available on the ICBF website, and it's available for AI bulls. So for a bull to appear on this list, they must have at least 100 calving records within the dairy herd. So they must be pretty widely used within the dairy herd, or at least have some records feeding in. And they also must have a reliability figure of about 25% or greater. Okay, so this is an example. This is just a screenshot of the top 10 bulls that are appearing on the active bull list for the Dairy Beef Index as of April of this year. So just to bring you through this in detail, the first thing that you'll see here is the bull's own details. So there's 4 columns here. The first one is the rank of the bull. So you can see that it ranks the bulls based on the euro value for the Dairy Beef Index. So the top bull here, for example, number 1, he has a Dairy Beef Index of 159 euro. And as Siobhan mentioned, what does that mean? So if we compare this bull with a Dairy Beef Index of 159, compare him to another bull, for example, that has a value of 100 euro, that means on average, this bull will leave you generate an extra profit of 59 euro per progeny that he has born. That'll be a combination of his calving and his beef traits. Okay, so then the other bull details that are available there are the AI code, the name of the bull, and then obviously the breed of the bull. And just to highlight on the breed of the bull, traditionally, I suppose we've always focused on, you know, the traditional breeds here, the Angus and the Limousin. But now when we look at this list here, what we can see is that there is a huge variation in the breeds that are actually appearing on the list. So the top bull there, he's actually an Aubrac. The second bull there is a Slayer. The third bull is a Limousin. And then we have lots of Belgian Blues also appearing in the top 10 for the Dairy Beef Index. But you'll also see your traditional breeds as you move further down the list. So lots of variation within the breeds here that you can look at. If we move on then to the second main column or the second main heading, it's the Dairy Beef Index itself, and it gives you a nice summary of what to look for when we look at the Dairy Beef Index. Like I mentioned, the first one is the euro value, and again, the higher the value, the more profit that will be generated from the bull. The second value there is the reliability, the percentage reliability associated with the bull. So what you can see here is that the higher the value, the more desirable it is. So for example, if you look at the third bull on the list here, the Limousin bull, he has a reliability value of 92%. A bull with a reliability of 92% means that there's a huge amount of data already feeding in on that bull and how he calved down within the dairy herd, and also how his progeny went on to slaughter. So at 92%, we're unlikely to see a sizable change as more information feeds in on this bull. Compare him to a bull with a reliability of 30%, there's not as much information available on that bull. So the higher the reliability, like I said, the more desirable and the less likely we are to see movements within that individual bull. So it's an important thing to look at, not just your overall euro value, but also the reliability associated with that bull. The next 2 columns then just give you a breakdown of where this Dairy Beef Index value is coming from for each bull. So for example, again, if we take the top bull, the Aubrac bull there, he has a calving value, the euro value of 46 euro, and then the beef value is 113 euro. So you can see of the 159 euro that makes up the total dairy beef index, the vast majority of his is coming from the beef, but he also is gaining in terms of the calf value, so, or the calving value. So again, it just gives you more information to help you to decide where when you're selecting an individual bull. If we look then, delve into a bit more detail on information on the calving traits, you can see that there's two main traits highlighted here. There's gestation length and then 3 columns on calving difficulty. If we just focus on the gestation length column for a minute, the gestation length, obviously, you know, we want our cows to go and calf and to get back milking as quick as possible. So the shorter gestation length in any bull is a more desirable characteristic of the bull. So the lower the gestation length here, or the more negative of the value here, it's more desirable for an individual bull. So again, if we take two examples here, if we take the top bull here, he has a value of minus 1.4 days. So that means on average, compared to the average dairy beef bull, or the beef bull, he will have a shorter gestation of about 1.4 days. If we take the example of bull 3 there, you can see he has a positive gestation, so he has a slightly longer gestation length of about 3.1. So again, if we were compared those two bulls and you were to try and select between bull 1 and bull 3, bull 1 would have a shorter gestation length of about 4.5 days compared to bull 3. So like I said, the more negative the value, the more and I suppose this is one of the main traits that we're interested in as a dairy farmer. The first thing you need to ask yourself in the calving difficulty, Siobhan has already explained that it's now split between the heifer, the dairy heifer, and the dairy cow. So when you're looking at this AI bull, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, what group of dairy animals are you going to use this bull on? Okay, if you're going to use it on a dairy heifer, then definitely focus on the first 2 columns because they're related to the dairy heifer. However, if you've made up your mind, and as Siobhan said, you're going to use this bull on your late calver, your late calving dairy cows, then really you want to focus solely on the dairy cow calving difficulty percentage, and you can really ignore the dairy heifer calving difficulty percentage. So the first column, let's assume for a minute we're mating this bull to dairy heifers. The first column we should look at there is the risk associated with mating this bull to a group of dairy heifers. As Siobhan mentioned, it really tells us, it ranks the bulls on the risk associated with them, and it goes from low, moderate to high. The low risk is really what you want to focus on here, because a low risk means that there's going to be less calving difficulty. It's going to have the easiest calving difficulty on your heifers, but also just as importantly, there's a high reliability behind that figure as well. So in other words, there's lots of information behind that bull on how he actually has calved down his dairy heifers. So there's unlikely to be movement in his calving difficulty percentage over time. So the lower the risk, the better, and definitely if you're focusing on heifers, you want as low a risk as possible. The next 2 columns are really the same thing, but like Siobhan mentioned, they're split between the heifer and the cow, and they're basically telling you the percentage calving difficulties. So these are how much difficult calving, so where you're going to have to probably pull the cap, or you might even need veterinary assistant. So obviously the lower the percentage here, be it on the dairy heifer or the dairy cow, the more desirable. So if we take an example of bull 6 here, he has a percentage on his dairy cows of about 8%. So that means that 2 out of every 25 dairy cows, you will need to give considerable assistance, or potentially even dairy assistance or veterinary assistance too. So obviously, you know, there's more risk associated with him. If we take the example of the top bull again, and if we look at his percentage for the dairy cow calving difficulty, he's at about 2%, just over 2%. So that means on average you will have to assist, give a considerable assistance to 1 out of every 50 cows that he is mated to. So as Siobhan mentioned, you need to ask yourself, what are you willing to accept here, and make a decision based on that, on how much calving difficulty do you think you can handle within your system. So that's a quick synopsis of the calving traits. But as Siobhan mentioned, 50% of this index also goes to the beef merit of the animals. So they're the carcass and the finishing characteristics associated with these bulls. So the first column there, it explains the carcass weight in kilos. And obviously the higher the value here, the heavier the carcasses, the more money we will hopefully obtain from these animals, or the progeny of these animals. So again, if we take an example of 2 bulls, what do these figures actually mean? So bull 1, he has a carcass weight, PTA of about 17 kilos, whereas bull 3, you can see he's going to produce a heavier carcass of 31 kilos on average. So between the two of them, if you're selecting between the two of them and you're interested in the beef value, you can see that bull 3 will on average give you 14 kilos heavier carcass at slaughter compared to bull 1. The next column, and it's a new initiative again, that's part of the Dairy Beef Index. It tells us the percentage of the bull's progeny that are not expected to meet the minimum factory criteria for weight. So here we're saying that the minimum criteria that each of the progeny that are slaughtered need to reach is about 280 kilos of a carcass. So for example, bull 1, we expect that about 11% of his progeny won't meet that minimum criteria, and obviously that will have a knock-on effect on the actual money that you will generate from these animals. Okay, so it's a relatively new thing, but again, it's a nice tool that allows us to rank these animals in terms of their carcass merit. The next 2 traits focus on carcass conformation, and obviously that's very much to do with the grading. The higher the value here, the better the grade of the animals. So again, if we take an example, if we compare bull 1 to bull 2, we can see that bull 1 on average will give us a higher conformation or a higher graded carcass compared to bull 2. And the next column over, it tells us pretty much the same thing. It tells us the percentage of the based on carcass conformation that will not reach the minimum spec that's required for you to get your bonuses. So here we say that the minimum spec is an O minus or less. Okay, so you can see, for example, in bull 1, about 0.1%. So most of his progeny that have been slaughtered to date have reached the minimum carcass conformation spec and have achieved higher payments based on that. Okay, so that's a quick synopsis of the calving or of the beef traits. The next 2 columns just tells us how much information is actually behind that bull in terms of the number of records that have actually gone through. So you can see for the dairy calving difficulty, the top bull, he has 145 records on how he calved down on an individual dairy herds. The carcass weight is not coming through on him yet, but that will flow through in time. Whereas you can see on bull 2 there, he has lots of carcass information feeding in behind these values. The final bit is just details on where you can get the actual bull, its availability and the price. And just to highlight as well, when you go into the active bull list on the ICBF website, there are filters there. So for example, if you're really interested in calving difficulty, for example for your dairy cows, you can filter on what is the minimum acceptable, or what is the maximum level of calving difficulty that you will accept within your own herd. So that's just a quick synopsis of it. Like I said, focus on the dairy beef, the overall euro value, the reliability, and then focus on the traits that you're particularly interested in when you're mating this beef bull to your dairy animals. Okay, Stuart.
Okay, thanks, Noirin. So just a question that's come in there for you is the selection of bulls on the bull list, from what we've shown here, seems to be either high beef index or high calving index, but maybe not a huge combination of both of them having both characteristics, we'll say. So would you see that changing in years to come?
Absolutely, Stuart. I suppose, as Siobhan mentioned, this is a very new initiative, and up until now, you really were selecting a beef bull either for the beef merits or the calving merits. Now what we're trying to do is combine the 2 of them. The breeding program going forward is very much focused on getting an all-round bull that can be good for both at the same time, not just one or the other. So that's really what the focus is on young bulls that are being tested now, is to try and get these bulls that will deliver for both the dairy farmer and the beef farmer. So we will see that hopefully leveling out in the future.
Okay, and then just on the, we'll say there's 2 bulls there coming up on the list, the number 1 bull and the number 8 bull, that have no carcass weight progeny records, but how do they get a carcass value?
So they would get it on close relations of theirs. So for example, if they have a brother that's also in AI, or their father has been widely used, all that information will feed down into him as well. So, or even on the mother's side. So information, you know, on closely related animals will feed in on that bull himself.
Okay, very good. And just again, just a point of clarification, I suppose, in the carcass traits that you're talking about, the out of specs and so forth, are they completely associated with dairy beef, or are they associated with suckler beef records as well?
So at the moment, they're across the board. Their carcasses are across the board, but there's new research going on where we're looking to do exactly what Siobhan has talked about in the calving, split it between the dairy and beef, and in the future then it will only be on the dairy animals coming from these bulls.
Okay. So then I suppose a question for either of you, if you wish to, I'll put it to you, Noirin, first, and then if you have a difference of opinion, Siobhan, you can come in. If you have, we'll say our gestation length is reducing quite significantly in our dairy stock as we use the higher EBI bulls, and it's getting shorter and shorter every year. If we cross one of them with a positive gestation length bull, do we kind of fall in somewhere in the middle, or what way does it pan out?
Yeah, so that's exactly what you would do. You would look at the gestation length of the 2 animals that you're mating together, and it's really the average of those is where you expect, the average between the 2 values is where you expect that animal to fall in. So yeah, you would see it falling somewhere in the middle.
Okay, very good. Okay, so just one other question here now. Just get it. Siobhan, question here. All stock bulls are listed as high risk of heifer calving difficulty, even though you'd expect some of them to be low risk.
Okay, Stuart. So where that is coming from in a lot of cases is the risk of dairy heifer calving difficulty is taking the 3 things into account that you should be considering when you're mating bulls on dairy heifers. That's the PTA value of the bull itself, its reliability, but also its breed variation. So we'll say previously you could have had a bull that was under the 2% that you might have considered safe, and he might have been a young bull and you were going to buy him for use on your dairy heifers, but he could have had a very low reliability. So over time, as you actually get records on that bull, you will see that his calving difficulty could potentially increase a lot more, and you could end up with an awful lot of difficult calvings. So what this trait is trying to take into account is those 3 things that factor into I suppose what will inevitably happen when that bull actually calves down, and associate the risk category with them. So if a bull is to become low risk, he needs to have a low PTA, so basically he needs to be an easy calving bull with a higher reliability and of a breed that doesn't particularly change that much. So what I mean by that is, I suppose there's more variation within the Belgian Blue or the Charolais breed than there is compared to the Angus. And I suppose not all bulls would be flagged as high risk. So if you actually, so the criteria for a bull to get a low, moderate or high is that he must be genotyped or he must have a minimum of 50 progeny records. So in the case of you're talking about young bulls, the bull would need to be genotyped, or otherwise he is flagged as high risk. And the reason for that is that we can't be sure, I suppose, who his sire is. So we're trying to give farmers the best advice that we can. So if we can't be sure that who you say his dad is really his dad, then he's flagged as high risk. So really, if you can get a bull that's genotyped, you're getting more information on him and you can be sure of what his figures are. Now, if you want to look at a bull that's high risk, that isn't genotyped, look at his PTA and look at his reliability and make sure that that figure, we'll say if it's 6, 7 or 8%, are you willing to tolerate, we'll say 8 and 100 calvings on heifers, are you willing to have a hard calving in all of those? So just take that into account, and if his PTA is low, that means he could go up considerably as the years go on.
Okay, very good. And then again, a question for both of you. Is there a role in terms of hybrid vigor because of using a beef cross onto the Frisian, or a beef animal onto the Frisian, in terms of gestation length or any of the characteristics, I suppose? Is there improved fertility through the use of a crossbreed as such? Do you want to comment on that, Noirin?
Yeah. So there would be hybrid vigor, yeah, definitely associated with that. When, hybrid vigor is basically when we get two breeds that are very unrelated, we see a jump in performance over and above what we expect at a genetic level. So yeah, you can see a lift in performance. I suppose the important thing to look at to see how much of a jump that we'll see. You need to look at what's the starting breeding values, or the PTAs for the trait of interest. So, for example, for gestation length, if you're mating a beef bull and he has a very positive value for calving or for gestation length, your dairy cow has a negative value, so she's a shorter gestation length. Okay, you might see a bit of a lift, about 10% of a lift over and above what we expect based on the PTAs. But you must remember where your starting point is. If you're starting at a very positive gestation length, you will see a lift, but it could still lead you with a positive or a longer gestation length, depending on the PTAs of the two parents, if you get me.
Okay. Okay, so we don't.
I might just add to that, Stuart. Just one thing there that I was looking at recently is the calving subindex. So if the cow has a really high calving subindex herself, if she's in the top 20% in calving subindex, generally the progeny have a 4-day shorter gestation length than cows that would be in the bottom ranked of gestation length. So if you're going to be mating a cow to a beef bull, and she is ranked up there really highly in terms of her overall calving subindex, then you will really bring down, I suppose, the overall gestation of that subsequent progeny, even if the bull is positive on gestation length.
Very good. Okay, so I'm just going to read out the results of the survey here, I'll summarize it then at the end as well. So the 4 questions asked: have you used the Dairy Beef Index to select beef bulls for your dairy herd before? Yes, no, or didn't know about it. So we had 38% said yes, 59% said no, and 3% didn't know about it. The second question was, are you willing to use slightly higher calving difficulty bulls to improve the carcass quality of the calf that you get? 53% answered yes, with 47% answering no. Is calf quality an important consideration for you? Is question number 3. 88% answered yes, with 13%, that doesn't add up to 100%, strangely enough, that said no. And then the final question was, have you sufficient number of bulls to maintain a compact calving pattern if you use less dairy AI this year? And the answer to that was yes by 59%, no to 16%, and 25% weren't sure, didn't know. So I suppose just to finish it up, I'm just going to make a few comments to kind of summarize what the girls have said. I suppose we should be considering using beef AI and dairy cows that are undesirable to generate replacements from early on in the season. And this is basically if the start date of your AI season is next Monday, which will be in a lot of cases, there should be cows potentially going into the crush that are going to get beef straws next Monday even. So they're not doing the business in terms of cow performance through milk recording analysis, or their EBI is poor on your EBI report. They shouldn't be used to breed a replacement from, because it's only continuing the poor performance into the future. So we should be using DBI then, obviously, to select the beef bulls that we're going to use there in order to try to drive that carcass quality side of things, to try and improve the calf that's available for the beef industry. And indeed, a lot of people are actually keeping, I think there's a figure there of half of farmers are keeping a share of beef stock still themselves, so it's worth investing in the genetics in it as well. And as Siobhan said, if the AI man is going to be in the yard anyway, it's just as easy to let him serve an animal with a beef straw than to be trying to pull out a stock bull and leave him cover the cow. Then finally, I suppose we should use beef AI, and this is very important that people pay attention to this point, I suppose, is that we should use beef AI. If we're going to stop dairying AI earlier this year, we should use beef AI for a longer period to make sure that we have enough cows served and in calf prior to letting the stock bull in and letting the job up to him. If we move too soon and we see it year after year, where there's either not enough stock bulls on the farm or a stock bull goes subfertile or infertile, the use of AI on a continued basis or for a longer time will actually help to solve a lot of problems in terms of late calving cows and empty cows at the end of the breeding season. And I would think that it's quite AI men may not fancy the idea of it from the point of view of having to continue for longer doing repeats. But I think even when the stock bull does go in, it's quite a good idea for people to continue to use an alternative breed as an AI straw with to serve that cow as well when they're seen bulling, just to be safe, I suppose. If people often say bulls are fertility tested, yes, that's fine. The fertility test is only for that day that they were actually fertility tested. If they get a touch of a sniffle basically or a cold, they can become subfertile, poor performance as a result, and as a result you end up with empty cows. And often they can be cows that were not necessarily bad cows in the first place or had poor fertility, but just for some reason, if you leave off a bull after 5 or 6 weeks of AI and expect him to do all the work, he's not going to be successful in that in terms of keeping your compact calving pattern. So just be conscious of that. I suppose there's great information there now compared to what we would have had in the past in terms of beef breeding index for dairy, and we should make use of that. And as Noirin has said, that as more and more information feeds into that index from carcass traits and calving surveys, very important to record good calving information as well for the benefits of all involved in the industry, then it's going to improve the index further and further. And I presume, I suppose, Noirin, again, I might just ask you to come in again there. Will there, similar to the EBI, will there be changes made to the index over time?
Yes, absolutely, Stuart. As new traits come in, and health traits are one of the things we're looking at now. The health of the calf. Definitely, new traits will come in as we get more information in on these animals to try and improve the index.
Very good. So, okay, we'll finish it up there. I suppose the one thing I would say to people is look at the calving difficulty of the beef bulls that you have used in 2019 and see how you got on in the 2020 calving season, and maybe push the boundaries a small little bit more. There's good information behind the calving difficulty surveys in terms of we're fairly confident. Actually, just on that point before I do finish, Siobhan, would you care to comment in terms of the calving difficulty in the DBI versus calving difficulty in the EBI? Are they the same, or is there a slight difference between them?
They're exactly the same, Stuart. So again, if it's 1%, it's 1 in 100 calvings. So whether that's an Angus bull or a Frisian bull, they're completely comparable across, and that goes for all the traits actually as well. So the beef traits as well would be comparable. They're all done that way. So it's if your dairy heifer and dairy cow calving difficulty in EBI and DBI.
Okay, very good. So that should give us confidence that as using the figures that we're familiar with in the EBI, that using the same figures under DBI, we'll be confident enough in terms of the calving difficulties that we're going to encounter with the sires that are going to be used. So as I said, push the boundaries a little bit more maybe. So if you use 4% calving difficulty bulls last year, try 5% if you can do that to get a slightly better carcass quality, maybe better carcass traits. That should lend itself to easier moving of calves subsequently into the beef market. So we wish you all the best. Encourage you to use DBI this year and make sure that you use sufficient AI and either beef or dairy to make sure that you're not going to overwork bulls and result in a spread calving pattern and maybe empty cows at the end of the season. We thank you for joining us for the last 4 days. Looking at the list of participants, a good few of you have joined every day, so we appreciate you joining in. Wish you all the best for the breeding season, which may be started or starting next week, and we'll be back with some more webinars in the next couple of weeks on hopefully topics that are of interest to you. Thanks for your attention, and thank you very much to Siobhan and Noirin for their time, and we very much appreciate your input into the webinar. So thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Bye.